And we're going to look at what happens when you're amazed by grace. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And what happens when you're actually amazed by grace? We sing Amazing Grace 10 times during any calendar year. It's a song that, out of all Christian hymns, is one of the top requested songs, and has been since the day of its appearance in a Baptist hymnal. There's something about Amazing Grace that lifts our spirits when we sing that song. It's the ever hope and the assurance that, regardless of what is faced, God is with us. He's proven himself faithful, and that grace turned our lives around. I've seen Amazing Grace sung at funerals, sung in worship services. I've even heard it sung once on a cruise ship. And it was a Christian cruise ship, don't worry, folks. But there is something absolutely amazing about grace when we understand grace. The undeserved nature of grace. Nothing we ever did deserved grace. It didn't. On my best day, I can't be good enough to justify, okay, God, you owe it to me. Amen.
Amen.
And on my best day, I often fail to thank God the way I should for the grace He's shown. Somebody mentioned to me today in one of my visits that if it weren't for God, I wouldn't be here. I said, yep, the same holds true for every last one of us.
Yeah.
We sing Amazing Grace, but are we amazed by it? What does a life look like that is amazed by grace? And I believe the Apostle Paul will show us that tonight. We live in a time where people feel entitled.
Yeah.
Basically, you owe me just because I'm me. You owe me all these things because I am who I am. But understand, folks, when we stand before a holy God, I am who I am becomes God, fix me to who you want me to be. I don't deserve anything for you, but I am so thankful for what you've given. See, when we're amazed by that grace, we begin to see ourselves in light of the holiness of God. And I was telling someone this the other day, that when we truly think about it, and truly stop and look at it, I will never run out of things to work on in my life as a Christian. That's why I don't have enough time to go around fixing everybody else and leaving my own to just sit there. Jesus said, get that log out of your eye before you get that speck out of your brother's. Because it's this constant work that needs to be done. Paul, we know his story. We know it inside out. You know, Paul, the man named Saul who wanted to stomp out everything that dealt with the church in the way, as we read in Acts. And he goes he sets out for Damascus, and his intention for that trip was, I'm going to get the paper I need to shut them up finally. God's intention for that trip was, I'm going to rearrange everything you've ever known.
Yeah.
What you hoped would die, you will eventually die for. And there on the road to Damascus, he's blinded, he's given instruction, and his life has changed. And when he writes this part of 1 Corinthians, It's a man who understands the amazing nature of grace. But it's not just a song he sings, it's a life he chooses to live. Now, brothers, verse number 1, I want to clarify for you the gospel I proclaimed to you. You received it and have taken your stand on it. You're also saved by it. You hold on to the message I proclaimed to you unless you believe for no purpose. For I passed on to you as most important what I also received. That Jesus died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures. And he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to over 500 brothers at one time. Most of them are still alive, but some have fallen asleep, and it almost sounds like apologetics right here. Here's the proof of it. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one abnormally born, he also appeared to me. For I am the least of the apostles. He said, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by God's grace, I am what I am. And his grace toward me was not ineffective. You want to talk about a verse that will bring tears to your eyes? Is that verse of Paul? By God's grace, I am what I am. And what's he talking about there? What's he referring to? Number one, he's referring to a transformed life. By God's grace, I'm saved. By God's grace, I have a purpose. I'm an apostle. Why? Because rather than deal with me by taking me out of this world, God decided to use me to change the world. He said, I am who I am, a leader, but only because I'm a follower. See, what Paul does here is essential to understand. He attributes it all to the grace of God. By God's grace, I am what I am. And his grace toward me was not ineffective. He says, however, I worked more than any of them. Yet not I, but God's grace that was with me. Therefore, whether it is I or they, so we proclaim, and so you have believed. I read through this passage this week and just kept reading those words of Paul, because it's a man who's amazed by grace. He's amazed because Christ didn't have to appear to him, but he did. We take for granted our salvation, that it is such a gift straight from God too often. Not a moment should go by in our lives that we don't thank God for salvation. From a Christless eternity in hell, we were saved. And it was by grace. God's grace. I've heard people complain at times in our church because I like to sing hymn number 105 quite often. And somebody came to me one Sunday and said, hey, I had two comments. Somebody was that were upset that we sang 105 again. And I said, well, I don't know who the two are. I don't care. Go back and tell them to take their hymnal home, read the words to that every day this week, and get it, and then they won't mind singing it. Marvelous grace of our loving Lord, grace that exceeds our guilt and our shame. Over on Calvary's Mount outpoured, there where the blood of the Lamb. Goodness gracious. Grace that will pardon and cleanse within. If we can get tired of that, how can we say we ever understood grace at all? Paul said, look, he could have killed me. He had every right to just kill me on that road to Damascus. But he saved me, and he could have just left me as a saved person. He could have done nothing with me, just said, all right, you were bad enough, and I'm going to give you this gift, and I'm just going to leave you in the corner. You just sit there and shut up. But he made me an apostle. See, here's what Paul did. Paul was able to see his condition in light of God's grace. Without the grace of God, he had nothing. But with the grace of God, it made him everything God had called him to be. And notice what he says after that. Because of that grace, he said, I'm going to outwork every one of them. I'm going to do it all. And I'd say he's pretty doggone effective, wouldn't you, church? 13 parts of the New Testament attributed to the hand of Paul. The missionary journeys. The work that he put in founding and starting churches. Why? Because he was amazed by grace. When that man was touched, he was redirected forever. It's kind of sad how many sing Amazing Grace, never understand what that phrase even means. Grace, where I was lost, but God made me found. Where I was dead, God brought me life. And where I was doomed, God gave me a future. Now that's some amazing grace. And what makes it even more incredible is I deserved none of it. Paul, if you read through his letters, I really should have written these down for you tonight. I'll try to remember to do it for next Wednesday. This was one of the earliest letters of Paul. Okay, this is 62, between 60 and 62 AD. And the others would come later. And here Paul says about himself, he said, I'm the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. And if you look at the progression through his later letters, he would talk about himself even worse. I'm the chief of sinners. And all these different phrases he would use. You see, he always built God up and kept himself humble before God. So that grace that he gave me, it wasn't ineffective. It will not go to waste. God's grace is never ineffective. It's poured out on us. It's awesome for us. But how do we respond to it? What do we do? When I'm truly amazed by it, anything he calls me to, I'll do it. Whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable. Whether it's my dreams or if it's his vision. Whether it's the places I long to go or the place I never want to be. I have to go if I'm amazed by his grace. Are we amazed by it? I want you to think about that this week. Let's get to our time of prayer and praise because we got a lengthy.